Welcome, Prime Minister.
Thank you so much, Don.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for signing up for a conversation with Ryan. It's an opportunity, and you're all here because you want to be involved in how we're navigating our way through these difficult times. You have questions. You want to be part of conversations about what we're doing with this country, with this world, and what your place is in it. I know this about you because these are questions that everyone has. Everyone is wondering, particularly these days when everything seems to be changing so radically and we're so challenged with such big issues going on, that it's really important that we can have real substantive conversations about the choices we're facing as communities, as societies, as a country, but also the choices we're facing as a world and how we're going to grapple with them. Because we're in a complicated time. We just came through a pandemic that's leaving lots of echoes in many different ways, from supply chain disruptions to mental health challenges being exacerbated for a whole bunch of people who went through really tough times. We're dealing with war returning to Europe, with the disruptions in the geopolitical stability we've had for 80 years, and also challenges to democracies, with authoritarian governments rising and using stronger and stronger levers to challenge and destabilize democracies in Western countries around the world. We're seeing the challenge of climate change, which has been growing for a long while, delivering more and more extreme weather events, causing us to rethink a lot of the things that we've done and question whether or not we're going to be able to succeed into the coming years. At the same time, the pace of change is accelerating. Right now, we're facing an inflation crisis that's due to the war and to disrupted supply chains and to all sorts of, and the restart from the pandemic. Interest rates are up. Global economy is potentially slowing down right now as well. And this is the world that all of you are going to be thrust into once you're finished your programs, as you get through this, to find jobs, build careers, build families. Many of you already have families, but you see how challenging this is, this world we're in. And there's a tendency, particularly given the amount of time we all spend online, to look for quick and simple answers to really difficult questions. In what we consume, the 7-second videos, the political slogans on bumper stickers, there's a simplification of all the challenges we're facing. And there's an old axiom that says that for every complex question, there is a simple answer. The problem is that simple answer is invariably wrong. But it's very tempting to seek those simple answers. And that's something that we have to try and step away from in politics, particularly in democracies. But democracies only work when people are actually engaged as active, thoughtful participants in how we shape our society as a democracy, the decisions we take as communities. Because politics is just how we choose to organize ourselves as communities and figure out the right direction for us all. And that's where having conversations where people can ask questions about things that are on your mind, ask questions about what framework we're looking at as a government to try and solve those difficult challenges, what trade-offs we're having to make, because there is no governing without choosing, without prioritizing. And in a country as amazingly diverse as Canada, which is an extremely positive thing because it gives us tremendous resilience, it gives us multiple perspectives to be able to solve complex problems in better ways for more people, taking into account all those different points of view is a real challenge. But it's one that we have demonstrated over generations an ability to grapple with and succeed, and it's something we're going to be able to continue to do. So that's why I'm really pleased to be here tonight. To use an example of one question that comes up all the time, because they don't have to be really sharp, deep, complicated political sciencey questions. One of the questions that comes up, what's my favorite thing as Prime Minister? Well, this is pretty much my favorite thing as Prime Minister. Getting to talk and listen directly with Canadians who are interested and engaged, curious about something that matters to them deeply, that they get to ask me about, that I may know a few things about or may just want to learn about from you. Because particularly coming off of a pandemic where we've all had to do too many things virtual and been separated for a while, being able to get out once again and engage with people, as I have over the past many months with lots of town halls like this, allows us as a government to really understand the things that matter the most to you and to understand the mindset that's carrying us through. So I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. Again, ask what's on your mind. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I hope you guys will learn a few things through it, but I certainly guarantee you I'll get to learn a lot. And that, like I said, is one of my favorite things. So with that, there we go. And I want to try to get to as many questions as possible. I am notorious for answering too long in the questions, and there's usually just a couple of hands that go up at the beginning, but by the time we get around the whole circle, there's like 25 hands still up that we're not going to get to. So be bold, be very varied in your questions. I'm going to start here, and we'll work around this way, but anyone from this section, there you go, right here. And what's your name?
Hi there, my name is Atif. I'm a mechanical engineering technology student. And my question's around what's your government doing around inclusion and diversity in the workplace? And the foundation for my question is this. In the last 3 weeks, personally, before I say this, kudos to the government for bringing Ukraine refugees into Canada. But the struggle's been the last 3 weeks, I've been helping two wonderful families going business to business, big boxes, and they would turn their backs on them regardless of how many openings they would have. And they would say, no, we have no openings as soon as they hear their stories. So that's where my question is. What's your government's plan on that?
I'm curious about that, Ante. Like, why, what reason are they giving? Because we all know there's a labor shortage and people working in big box stores, there's help wanted signs in every place we go to. Why are they saying no? Is it a language barrier? Is it, oh no, that you're bringing too much baggage? Like, what are they saying?
They're saying nothing. So they're saying there are no openings. So as soon as they say there are no openings, you go onto their websites and they have tremendous amount of openings in every position. And it's not just one retailer, it's many of them. And these positions are not high-end positions. They're very labor positions where it doesn't even need a dialogue, where you're just putting up stock on the shelf, for example.
Is it an issue around work permits, or they have all the papers and all? Well, listen, I'm going to have to follow up on that, because what I have seen instead across the country is communities and small businesses and families and people just opening up their homes and their businesses and the opportunities to people coming in, whether it was the Syrian refugees 7 years ago who came in, whether it's Ukraine now, particularly because there is such an understanding that what Ukrainians are going through in Ukraine and standing against Russia is really important to obviously protect the right of Ukrainians to protect their territory, their sovereignty, but also choose the path for their own country. But they're standing up as well for the principles of the UN Charter, for the rights of democracies, for the rights of any country in the world to not be invaded by a neighbor with a larger army. If Putin succeeds in his invasion of Ukraine and manages to draw profit from it, you know that every authoritarian leader around the world is going to say, hey, maybe that'll work for me. Maybe I can redraw lines on a map. Hey, we have a part of our neighboring country where there's a lot of people who speak my language. Maybe we can use our army to cross this river. I mean, it leads to a level of breakdown in the world that is really important. So that's one of the reasons why, yes, Canada has a strong Ukrainian diaspora. We have, the largest community, one of the largest communities of Ukrainians outside of Ukraine in the world. but it's more than just an attachment to that country. It's the principles and values that underpin the rules-based world order that matters so much to Canadians and to other people around the world, why we are continuing to step up for Ukraine. So I will follow up on what I'm hearing around certain big box stores. Today I had lunch in Newmarket at a restaurant that was an Italian restaurant, but that converted to a pop-up restaurant for two Ukrainian moms who came over about 6 months ago and decided that they were going to run the kitchen for a few weeks. And we had pierogies and borscht, and it was a wonderful experience. But that's the experience I've seen so often of people saying, yeah, here's what we can do to help people who are here while their husbands and brothers and fathers are over, standing up not just for them, but for all of us. So I will follow up on that because I've heard great stories of generosity. We need to make sure they're more consistent. Thank you. Another question from this section. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Carol. I'm finishing my diploma in HR. I'm an international student, and it's a pleasure meeting you. So my question is, do you think the Canadian government is providing adequate job opportunities for international students? I see nodding over there. International students like myself.
Well, first of all, we love international students. International students are great in that it's a way of having people come from all around the world, discover Canada, get the skills, and either they bring some Canadian experience and Canadian learning, Canadian know-how back to help in their home country, or they choose to stay here and build a family, build a life from having had years of experience here while going to school. It's a great thing. We have recently shifted some of the rules around hours that you can work and things like that, and we're going to continue to look at that. One of the complaints I get a lot around international students is that it's more expensive to be an international student, much more expensive than to be than for Canadians. And I understand how challenging that is, but as a country, we have to make sure we're giving the best and most affordable opportunities to Canadians as well. And that's always going to be our priority. And there are potentially millions of people who would love to come to be international students in Canada. We need to make sure we're covering Canadians to make sure we're reducing the barriers as much as possible. And then we do charge, or institutions charge higher fees for international students. But it's actually more that as a government, we don't subsidize as much the international student fees as we subsidize the fees for everybody else. So it's about fairness, but we're always looking for ways to make sure that international students have the best possible experience in Canada, because we love it when international students decide to stay and build a life here, and we'll keep doing that. Thank you for your question, Carol. Okay, one question from the back there, and then we'll come over to you guys. So think of questions.
Hey there, my name's Peter Cohen. I'm doing a 2-year degree in business management and supply chain management. So last year, the Durham Regional Government decided that we should accommodate the expected population growth by building a portion of the needed housing outside of existing urban boundaries. So that means that there will need to be new infrastructure built, stuff like sewers, roads, electrical infrastructure, and normally that would be paid for largely by developers in the form of development charges. But with the provincial government's Greenbelt Bill, or the More Homes Built Faster Act, those costs will now be shouldered entirely by the municipality or the taxpayer. Last month, the federal government launched an investigation into the impacts of the Ford government's Greenbelt Bill. And I'm just wondering if the investigation has the ability to kind of alleviate the burden of that increased cost from the backs of the taxpayer.
That's a great question. It does touch a lot on provincial issues, so I don't want to weigh too much into those. But I will say that it's a real priority for all orders of government to be building more housing in this country. We need more density. We need more affordable housing. We know that all of you are probably facing concerns about housing, or wonders whether or not and when you're going to be able to buy your first home. As young people, that's a common thing we're hearing. One of the things we need to do is increase the supply of housing. The federal government has done it a couple of different ways. We've created a rapid housing program that is converting either creating rapid modular housing or building, converting existing buildings or unused hotels into housing, and that's been very effective across the country, particularly coming out of the pandemic as there was a need to house people rapidly. But we're also, the big one we just announced a few weeks ago was the Housing Accelerator Fund, $4 billion to help municipalities with some of the processes that are going to lead to more housing, whether it's increased density or changing the zoning or accelerating some of the processes to be able to create hundreds of thousands of new homes more rapidly across the country. So these are things that we've put in place. And the provincial level and municipal levels are also looking at tools that they have for this. We are concerned about the idea of putting in opposition protection of the environment and building new homes. I think there's ways of doing both of them together. So yes, our environment minister is making sure that the proposed plan to build in the green belt is not going to have significant long-term environmental consequences. This is something that I know people care about. Yes, we need more homes, but we need to make sure that it's done right. At the same time, there is also concern that there is downloading on the municipalities costs at a time where municipalities are facing, like everyone else, rises in the costs of all the inputs. The affordable housing project that they've had on the books for a year or two suddenly got a lot more expensive because inflation has gone up. So we're going to continue to work as constructively as we can with other orders of government, particularly with municipalities, to get things built. And we will continue to do our responsibility around making sure that we're protecting the environment. As for concerns that people have around downloading costs to municipalities, a lot of municipalities have been coming to the federal government saying, wow, you really stepped up for us during the pandemic. Can you step up for us now in how we're operating our cities? And I've sort of had to say no, because municipalities depend on the provinces, not on the federal government. And over the course of the pandemic, the federal government invested about 8 of every $10 spent on supporting people through the pandemic, of getting us through, was almost all on the federal government. A lot of that was massive transfers to the provinces. So right now, the federal government is having to be very careful because we've changed the fiscal equation. We still have the lowest deficit in the G7. We're still in a strong fiscal position. But it's the provinces that actually have much stronger fiscal positions right now. Now, if provinces are unwilling to actually support municipalities to the right way, municipalities will turn to us and say, you guys were there for the pandemic. Well, we can't just continue to fund, particularly because the Constitution says it's not our job, that's the municipalities, the province's job. They've got to do their job. So it's a conversation with the provinces we need to have. We understand people need more homes. We can build them, but it shouldn't be at the cost of municipal services or the environment.
So just kind of like a follow-up question
Sure.
About provincial government. So when I heard about the situation, obviously wasn't very happy to hear about it. So I emailed my local MP a few times and haven't heard back from him. Maybe he's busy. So I just wanted to know what, for you, kind of catches your eye in an email or like a phone call.
There are different politicians who have different approaches. I love to do town halls. I love to talk with people. I love to have people ask me tough questions that sometimes I can answer, sometimes I can't. I spent the first 5 years of my career as a politician as a local constituency MP. I mean, the Liberal Party was in the nosebleed seats in the House of Commons, down to 35 seats. And I spent a lot of time on the ground, and I discovered that even when you're not in government, there's a lot of things you can do as an MP or an elected official to advance files. People should be able to hear from their local representative. You should be able to go and get a meeting with them to ask them about that. When politicians get disconnected from the people they're supposed to serve, they become less and less well to actually be able to serve them. And one of the great things about our system is that when you become the MP or the MPP for a region, you represent 100% of the people in your district, in your riding. not only the people who voted for you or agreed with you. That's the way our system works. And certain politicians do a better job of that, but so certainly getting involved, active. Maybe they don't have enough young volunteers. Maybe you can go and volunteer for this local MPP and actually see if you can make a difference. And if they keep turning you away, I can guarantee you Ryan Turnbull would be happy to have you as a local volunteer. Because getting more people involved and engaged and highlighting the things that matter is how we remain institutions that are responsive to what people need.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter. Question from over here. There you go.
Howdy, I'm Liv. I'm in the culinary management program, and I was just wondering what your government is considering, like any proactive measures against the food wastage in this country, considering a majority of the food that we grow here is wasted.
One of my very first public engagements, or my first sort of forays into community activism, was actually with Montreal's largest food bank. I got involved in the early 2000s. Actually, I'd been involved in various activism things, but it was one of my big formal ones. And I got to see just the incredible work being done by food banks to serve extremely vulnerable people. As we saw from the recent report from the Daily Bread, food bank usage is massively up. And one of the huge frustrations is the level of wastage of food that we have. I know there's a number of municipalities and even a couple of provinces that have put forward programs and frameworks that encourage a lack of food wastage. I think now is a great time to do that. One of the things that the federal government can do, because we can't really play too much at that level of detail when you're looking at the entire country, because what we might want to bring in for here in Durham might not be the right thing for the lower mainland of BC or what they're facing in Iqaluit. But what we can do is make sure that there is proper funding for organizations and for food banks and supports through everything that we're doing. We stepped up big time around food banks during the pandemic because that was a time where we really had to step up, but we'll keep doing that. And what are of the various ideas you've seen, what is one of the best ones that you've seen in terms of making an impact? And if we could do something, what do you think we should do in terms of that?
Well, personally, I think it's really great how at the college we're building a building right now to turn all the food wastage from the CFF building into compost for the gardens. I think maybe if that was more readily available to like restaurants and even just like residents of Canada, that would really help benefit us in the long run, just growing food and also combating the food wastage.
Well, listen, composting is something that municipalities increasingly are doing and families are increasingly doing. But making sure that you're composting the stuff that is really waste, but you're actually reusing or not throwing out food that is untouched instead of getting it to food banks and to soup kitchens and things like that. These are the kinds of things that matter. But thank you for all your work on that, Liv. Another question? Yeah, go ahead. You get the choice.
Hello. I am Agnes Langhorst. I'm actually a grade 10 student at Brooklyn High School, and my question is regarding the current global and climate change crisis we've been facing. Specifically, over the last 2 years, I believe I've experienced more power outages due to storms than I have in my entire life. Along with that, I've been experiencing more and more warmer winters and more increasingly hot summers, and I just find that it's especially concerning to me as a youth because this is the world I'm growing up into, and I want to be able to know that when I'm older, I'll be able to have an environment that's sustainable, an environment that I can live in, and that possibly my kids could live in the future. And that's just a really concern for me. So I want to know what the government is doing specifically in relation to the environmental crisis that's going on.
Thank you, Agnes. I share your worries. Actually, environmental activism was one of the ways I got into politics in the first place. I was busy doing my master's degree in environmental geography when I ended up leaping into politics, which was my excuse as to why I never actually finished my thesis. But I finished the coursework, but not the thesis. But it's the big question that we're facing right now. We are seeing the world changing. We are seeing more and more extreme weather events, whether it's the more frequent hurricanes like Hurricane Fiona that sort of just devastated the Atlantic provinces just a few months ago, whether it's the terrible floods that devastated BC and washed out significant sections of highways, whether it's the wildfires, whether it's the drought problems. We're seeing a greater variance that's more than just global warming. As I remember hearing from a mayor in Saskatchewan at one point who told me, look, we can handle a 100-year flood. We just can't handle it every 5 years. And that's what the increased reality is. We are, as a world, working to drive down our emissions and hold the global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. And the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change out of the UN, is saying it's going to be a close thing. You see that 1.5 degrees is probably the trigger point at which things get far, far worse. So we have to continue to step up. But there is going to be, there is momentum built right now that means even if we stopped everything tomorrow, there is going to be changes and it's going to get worse before it once again gets better. But I do believe we can hold it and it can get better. One of the big drivers on that is people are realizing not just the cost, the increasing cost of inaction. It's harder and harder to find people who are flat out denying that climate change is real. There still are a few, many of them conservative politicians, but farmers seeing their fields more flooded, seeing their growing seasons affected, seeing new pests coming in because of warmer weathers, engineers having to build differently because the floods are getting more intense when they're building bridges. Like the challenges and the shifting and the cost of climate change is increasingly real. But at the same time, the opportunities as a motivator to deal with climate change are becoming more and more real as well. We're seeing, because for a long time, people like my friend David Suzuki and others have been telling us, if we don't change our ways and protect the environment, the world's going to end. We're all in big trouble. And that has scared a few people into behaving better and being thoughtful, but it hasn't led to that massive shift that we need. Because it's, the tragedy of the commons. It's like, even if I do everything I can, if they're still polluting, I'm going to hurt my own quality of life, and we're still going to end up in the toilet as a planet. So what we've had to do is change the mindset across the board. One of the best ways of doing that is to actually put a price on pollution. That's what we chose to do. And it was a huge fight when we did that. But if individuals and families and companies and businesses understand that the more greenhouse gases they emit, the more there's going to be a cost associated with it, that's incentivizing people to change. Now, the problems with prices on pollution is so much of our society these days is grounded in things like oil and gas that emit carbon when you burn them, that it brings extra costs for families to put a price on pollution. And what we wanted to make sure was that we were moving forward with a price on pollution that didn't add extra costs to average families. And there's different types of prices on pollution around the world. Some of them are designed to take the revenues from that price on pollution and put it into innovative research into the next solutions, or to subsidize new types of power generation or whatever. We went very, very simple. We said we're going to return the revenue from the price on pollution to people in the jurisdiction in which it was collected. With that means about 8 out of 10 households in this country, in places where the federal price on pollution applies, get more money back. You will have noticed the climate action incentive that comes every 3 months, check for a few $100s. that more than compensates for the extra costs that the price on pollution gives you. But that price signal is still there. So companies like Dofasco in Hamilton that was looking at continuing to make steel powered by coal, we're looking at about $150 million a year in extra penalties because of the price on pollution by 2030. And they said, wow, really makes sense for this and other reasons to switch from coal-fired steel making to electric arc. And they're going to do it actually by 2026 because the demand for green steel is rocketing upwards. And Dofasco is suddenly going to be one of the most competitive steel-making plants in the world because of it, because everyone wants clean steel made with clean electricity, powered by clean electricity and done with electric arc. So there are things we are starting to see now. When Volkswagen decided to come and invest, the first battery plant in the world outside of Europe for them, to come into Southern Ontario. We're starting to see that actually leaning into the fact that the world's got to change because of climate change, that we've got to change our way of doing things, is motivating people to make those better decisions. And it comes down, Agnes, to one of those challenges I remember struggling with as a student. Well, what if this company, what if Dofasco's just doing this change, not because they care about the environment, because they want to make more money off of this new process on steel? The answer is, I don't care. If they're actually changing away from coal-fired and they're managing to make more money, that is a good thing. And that's something that's going to incentivize more and more people to do it as they figure out to do it. So we're going to have to adapt to the fact that climate change is going to continue with more and more weather events that are going to require us to build back better and be more resilient in our communities. And that's going to cost money. But our ability to do that is going to depend on having a growing economy and being successful. Well, the world right now is looking at who's doing green solutions better. And up until 2015, when we first got elected, there was a lot of reasons why Canada chose not to step up in leadership on climate change. Every year at one of the COP conferences, we got the Fossil of the Year award in Canada. One of the reasons why we are a significant oil and gas producing country. It's a big part of our exports. It's a big part of our GDP. It's a big part of our prosperity. Lots of jobs in the oil sector, always have been. And the government of the time felt that it was too dangerous or too costly to start moving away from oil and gas and all the jobs and all the revenue that it came with. But when we got elected, we saw where the world's going. We see that people are going to want those other solutions. And I know that those energy workers who figured out how to get usable oil out of the oil sands, it was a technological solution, we're going to be able to figure out how to decarbonize those oil sources. We're going to be able to how to do carbon capture and storage on natural gas. We're going to be able to figure out how to move forward on renewables, on hydrogen, on nuclear, and all those things if we created the context for it. And people are always afraid, oh, it means we're going to lose our jobs. Well, you may lose your job doing oil-based stuff, but if you know how to build a pipeline, you're going to be building a pipeline for hydrogen as well as instead of a pipeline for gas. You're going to build a processing plant that builds solar panels instead of building a processing plant that's extracting oil. There are so many jobs in the greener, cleaner economy of the future. And we're beginning to see it with companies like Michelin, like Volkswagen, like ArcelorMittal, like Rio Tinto. There's a huge range of them coming to invest in Canada because we've got a price on pollution. We got some of the cleanest energy around and are moving forward on it in our electricity grid, and we're going to keep doing it. So there's a lot to be worried about, but there's also a lot to be optimistic about.
Thank you. I just have one tiny quick follow-up question. I I understand that energy production is obviously a very large part of the current environment and how much carbon we produce and how much carbon dioxide we produce. But I feel like one of the another large producer of greenhouse gas emissions and is often overlooked is our animal industry. A large amount of that creates that, and I'm just wondering, along with that, it uses a lot of water and it uses a lot of food that we could be using, and I'm just wondering if we have any plans to do with that, with the amount of water, food, and greenhouse gases that are released by our livestock industry.
I think there's a lot of people making choices to shift in their consumptions. We developed a protein supercluster in the prairies a while. It was really focused on growing pulses and grains that are more and more necessary around the world and more in interest as people are varying their diets. I think there are things that we can and should be doing around looking at how in our farming, including in our industrial farming or large-scale livestock farming, we can be reducing emissions. A lot of people are making choices that work for them. Others will continue to love a good steak like me. I will admit we're probably eating a little less red meat these days, as much for health as for environmental reasons. But I'm never going to stop, and a lot of people won't stop. Some people will. I think making sure that people have all the information, making sure that people understand that it's worthwhile to innovate and support our ranchers and our farmers in looking for ways to reduce their emissions, to make sure we're continuing to give healthy food to people in different ways, is something that's going to come along. There's a lot of conversations about it. I remember when I was a kid, we were all worried about beef from lands that were clear cut in the Amazonian rainforest. There's a lot more conscience about it, and people I think are stepping up. But again, no easy answers in this one, but more awareness, more thoughtful, more people thinking about the consequences of their actions and the costs associated with it, even the invisible costs, is how we get to a better place.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agnes. Another question. Here we go. How about you in the back? What's your name?
Prince. I'm a marketing major. Hello, how are you doing today?
Very good. Sorry, what was your first name?
Prince.
Prince.
I had a question not really concerning the internal factors of Canada as a whole, but as a question mainly about you. Knowing what you know now and the experience that you have gained over the years, if you were to have the opportunity to talk to your younger self, what would you say? And not just like an artificial answer.
Dude. God. I think the things that I look back on regret were the times I chickened out. The times I didn't sort of take that chance. You regret the things you didn't do. The things you did do and failed miserably, at least you learned from. Although I do tell my kids, be careful of those permanent mistakes. But the temporary, don't get addicted to drugs and things like that. Those are the challenges. But allow yourself to take chances, and try and trust your gut. If something feels wrong, take a step back. I remember a few times saying, I had a bad feeling, and yet I still went ahead, and it was bad news. God. Damn, Prince, it's a tough question. You know what the big one was? And actually, my much younger self, I struggled with it, but then I figured it out in university. I still didn't get great grades, but it was a lot easier for me. It's showing up. When I became a teacher, and I built, the grading grid that I was going to be grading the kids on, and said, okay, you get a point if you get your name and the date right. You get 2 points if you have a topic sentence in your first thing. You get, just showing up and saying, looking at that and saying, okay, well, let me do this. Not hard, not complicated, just being there. Learning that it is better to show up to class and listen and take a few notes, that's worth about 8 hours of studying from reading the textbook or showing up on someone else. But even in relationships or in just about anything you do, if you are there and present and not thinking about the next thing or about thinking what you'd rather be doing, but saying, okay, this is where I am right now, this is what I'm doing, let me actually be totally there in this moment. Like I think now with knowing that and trying to do that, if I could get into one of those stupid movies of Freaky Fridays that zap me back to high school, it'd be like a superpower, man. Like I'd be like just showing up and being present as life is unfolding around you is probably the biggest thing.
Personally, I know going through like the growing pains of like from high school to like university, what would you say was like your biggest motivator to keep going and, like you said, showing up? Like what was really motivating you besides wanting to make a change? What?
But see, that it wasn't besides wanting to make a change. It was wanting to figure out how I could have an impact on the world. I mean, we're all faced with this challenge of, okay, I want to be like my parents in this way, and I don't want to be like my parents in this way. And how do I navigate that? And how do I figure out who I am or what I am? Well, the one thing I learned from my parents, particularly from my dad through his job, was you feel best about yourself. And I learned it early on in volunteering as well. Not by what you get from the world, but what you have to offer, how you shape the world around you. I mean, if you think about it, we're social animals. We define our happiness in our sense of accomplishment, our sense of self, by whether or not we have value to the community around us, value to the tribe. And the value you have for the community you're part of is what you can bring to that community. Are you a strong and reliable friend? Do you make people laugh? Are you showing up with great ideas? Are you a leader within your community? Or are you someone who solves problems? Are you really good? Like, what is it that you have that can contribute to the community around you? And for me, I spent a long time drifting in high school and into university, and I was going to try and do the things that I thought my dad wanted, and I ended up self-sabotaging and flunking, coming close to flunking out of high school, and then picked the most useless undergraduate degree I possibly could, English Lit, because there's no way I was going to be expected to have a job coming out of English Lit. Which ended up being one of the best things I could ever do, because I still, the love of language that I have and the way I craft that. But it was a sense of taking some of the pressure off of myself and really trying to say, okay, what is it that I can try and figure out to have the best impact? And that's where, when I went through university, I decided, okay, I can be a teacher, and I love teaching. So I was teaching high school for many years, and that was a way of being concretely impacting the world around me. And then I shifted towards more environmental activism, and that ended up bringing me into politics, but not expecting that I was supposed to have all the answers now. And granted, I was lucky. I came from a family that had the ability to support me while I was trying to figure things out. But knowing that it does take time, and knowing that taking those steps on saying, okay, I really like this, let me try doing this as a way of impacting the world around me. So often we look at accumulating material goods or money or wealth as the actual value you have to a community. Well, no, it can be, in many cases, representative of the value you have in contributing to the community, but it is not that value itself, which is why there are so many miserable millionaires and billionaires in the world. You see someone who is actually anchored in their community, living a life in which they work hard, but they contribute and they shape the world around you. They will be a lot happier than a whole bunch of people who feel like they won the lottery and therefore feel like perhaps deep down they don't deserve what they have. If you've worked for what you have a capacity to draw from it.
So would you say life is mainly learning how to walk and then eventually learning how to run to eventually flying to where you want to eventually go off to?
If that's your path, sure. But I think thinking of it as having to be the progression, for me is like, yeah, I remember I had a public speaker at my school coming in and tell us that we were the leaders of tomorrow. So we had to study hard and we had to eat our vegetables and be nice to our parents, and maybe one day we'd get a good enough job that we would be a leader. And I'm like, that's not right. We need to be leaders now with what tools we have now. So sure, there's always going to be a progression in the impact you have. But if you're going to fly, you might as well start flying now, right? In small leaps, and don't go too far, but focus on what you can bring. Don't hold yourself back, and don't let the world hold yourself back. Be thoughtful about what the steps are necessary. But if that's where you want to go, focus on that. Okay, one more question. There we go.
Okay, so you said that if you want to fly, you have to fly. But then how do you deal with the crashes and the burnouts?
Well, that's where, when you're flying, first, fly off a small stool. Don't fly off a building, right? I mean, like, be thoughtful about it. But you're going to do fine, Prince. Thank you. Okay, one more question. Yes.
So firstly, thank you, Prince, for your question, and thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for answering it, because one of the reasons I'm here is because I took a chance, leaving what I knew from my home country to be here in Canada. So thank you.
What's your name?
My name is Tasharna Thompson-Henny, and I am studying project management, and I know you may not remember that. It's Tash. T-A-S-H. All right? So my question, because I heard a lot about labor shortages, and I am online. I am on LinkedIn looking like, where is the jobs? Where really is the labor shortage? I think I've changed my resume about 10 times now because I'm in the hunt. And as a recruiter myself, I do understand the bit of uncertainty that come with hiring a temporary resident in a permanent position. So my question is there a way, or if you can consider having a pool or a pilot program where you targeted international students within colleges and universities and put us in that special pool so we can be considered for permanent residency?
Listen, Dash, that's a great idea. And these are the kinds of pilot projects that we are busy working on in various places across the country. There is a labor shortage, absolutely. But there still is a lot of challenges in connecting people with those jobs. That's where places like Durham College do such a great job of looking at where those gaps are. And I know the graduation rates are something Don's very proud of. Sort of not the graduation, but the placement rates are something that Durham College is rightly proud of, because responding to the actual needs in the market and giving people tools for that is a key part of it. But making sure as well that we're facilitating those steps and that we're encouraging people who have the skills and are here temporarily to transfer into staying here more longer term is hugely important for Canada. I mean, we are a country that was built through immigration over the past many generations and centuries. The Indigenous peoples who were living here for time immemorial saw people come here from every corner of the world and build this country up, build it to what it is today. And we do well because, well, there's sort of a self-selection process. If someone's going to leave their home and their community and their language and their everything they've ever known and cross an ocean to try and, build a life for themselves and new opportunities for themselves, there's a level of, taking action, of bravery, of drive that ends up benefiting all of our society. That's one of the reasons why North America in general has done so well over the past century or so, when other parts of the world that haven't been built on as much immigration have sometimes struggled. But now the world is looking for more immigrants and more opportunities, even as there are massive migration crises, and countries around the world are turning their backs on immigration. And one of the things that Canada has as an extraordinary example, advantage, is that we remain a place where immigration is viewed positively. It's seen as what it actually is, which is a richness for our communities, a creator of jobs, a creator of wealth, a creator of resilience within our communities. And we're extremely fortunate to be able to be as ambitious as we are in welcoming in people and building a stronger future. So I certainly look forward to doing that with you, Dash.
Thank you. Just one more thing. If you're ever, or your office short staff or anything, I am available to help you with that research, okay?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you my path as a politician. It's been very good. Because I'm the Prime Minister's office, I get to poach from all the ministers' offices and the MPs' offices, their best stars to come work for me. So get your foot in the door with Ryan, and I will keep an eye out for you in the future. Thanks, Dash. Okay, question. And I'm going to warn you now, I'm going to shorten my answers because there's so many great questions here. But yes, go ahead.
My name is Sairam, and I am a data analytics student. So we all know the emergence of AI and how handy it is becoming to everyone. So ChatGPT obviously is very famous now. I myself had even some personal questions that I asked ChatGPT, and it helped me like a real friend. But
just don't fall in love with the AI. There's been too many movies about that already.
That's the thing.
She's not a real girl.
Yeah. So I want to know whether the government sees AI as a potential risk, and if it does, what could be the steps taken to mitigate the problems? Now, I'm a data analytics student. I know the kind of data that is collected and what can be done with it. At the same time, when it's an AI which can be programmed by anyone, and not anyone, but there are people who can do anything they want to. And since money is becoming more digital rather than physical, that's another potential risk. So what could be the potential steps we can take to mitigate future problems?
Jeez, nice easy question for me tonight. Thank you, Saidam. First of all, we have to understand that Canada is one of the global leaders in AI. And it happened because Canadian governments of many different stripes continued to invest in scientists and researchers like Geoffrey Hinton at the University of Toronto, Joshua Bengio in Montreal, Rich Sutton in Edmonton. And were able to make it through what's known as the AI winter and actually come out with the deep learning approach that is now so effective in AI. So Canada has established clusters. I've been visiting some of them where you see students coming from all around the world to work on AI in Canada. But we also saw early on the challenges around AI. AI could be used for amazing good, but like any tool, could also be used for nefarious and negative purposes. So as we were developing, as we were seeing it develop, when Canada hosted the G7, the large industrialized nations in Quebec in 2018, we put in place, working with France, the beginnings of the Global Partnership on AI that is focusing on ethical rules and principles around AI. And it may be simple to say, okay, ethical rules, how do you ground that? Well, don't do evil is a good way to start, but how do you explain that to a computer? Well, grounding it in things like our Charter of Rights and Freedoms as an approach, making sure we're working with top scientists around the world around how the data is used, because AI needs two things. It needs brilliant programmers and thinkers. It also needs massive amounts of data that is reliable, that can be churned through. Well, the kind of data and the kind of programmers working on this, if it's all, you know, a non-diverse bunch of experts who all went to the same schools and all went to the same place and don't have the intersectionality or the diversity of experiences to actually reflect those things. Well, the outputs of the AI are going to be skewed in favor of certain communities or certain, you know, power bases in this economy or in this society that will have better outcomes for some, which is great for the people who already had the power, and worse outcomes for others who are invariably further marginalized as soon as there's development. So it's not just about good versus evil, it's about making sure there's multiplicity of voices and experiences and languages and perspectives as we train up these AIs to be more and more thoughtful. We're still obviously in the early days, and with almost everything, technology is running faster than governments and legislators can keep up. But we're doing our best, and we're gathering some of the best thinkers in the world to look at what we can do and what kind of bounds we can put around it and how we can make sure that I don't think we're as worried about the singularity as we used to be, but there are lots of bad things that can happen as we move forward, and making sure that everyone in that sphere is empowered to be thoughtful about the potential consequences and rigorous in their engagement, and part of a supportive network around the world that is focusing on that is how we're trying to make the best of what is going to be an incredibly positive and powerful tool, but that could also, you know, be responsible for calamities and catastrophes if we don't. Thank you. I can't take follow-ups, so we're not going to get to enough people, so I'm going to go with you, and then we'll go to you in the back.
Hello, Prime Minister. My name is Jacqueline Skinner. I'm a student of Office Administration Health Services. I am concerned about the Ford government's creeping privatization of healthcare here in Ontario. I know healthcare is a provincial responsibility, but what are you going to do to stop the implementation of an American-style healthcare system here in Ontario?
Great question. Canadians are rightly proud of our public universal healthcare system. It's one of those things that is hugely up there on the list of how we differentiate ourselves from Americans, but also how we take pride in what we've been able to build as a social safety net. You know, if you come down with a rare disease, you don't lose your house, and that's something that we're rightly proud of. But we also have to recognize that our healthcare system isn't delivering to the level that Canadians need it to. Through the pandemic, we saw that there were gaps in our healthcare systems that needed to be filled, but also we saw that there are needs to step up in very specific areas beyond the pandemic. As you say, healthcare delivery is the responsibility of the provinces. It means we have 13 different healthcare delivery systems across the country, which is great for being able to adjust to local needs. The demographics and population of PEI is very different from the demographics and population of Ontario. It makes sense that they have different approaches on delivery. But the federal government is there to make sure that all Canadians across the country have equivalent access to the same high-quality health care in every corner of the country. And the way we do that is through enforcement of the Canada Health Act, and also through partially funding the health care to the provinces. Now, the Canada Health Act means that we do have a tool that we have used repeatedly over the past years to hold back money transferred to provinces when they are not living up to the standards of the Canada Health Act. And we see in some places, in some provinces, and in some politicians, a desire to say, see, our public health care system isn't working, so we have to go to privatization. And that is a lazy but dangerous argument to make. Because as soon as the quality of care you get, or the access to care, is dependent on your ability to pay, you've broken the system. And if you are sucking doctors and nurses out of a public system to go into a second tier of private system, you're not guaranteeing the same level of care from the public system. So part of what we did when we signed a $200 billion deal with the provinces that we're working out right now in the details is make sure that they are going to stick with the principles of the Canada Health Act that protects a universal system. But more than that, we don't have either the expertise or the authority at the federal level to say, okay, this is how many nurses you need on this particular floor, this is how often the bedpan should be changed. We don't want to micromanage the healthcare systems. The provinces do that. But what we do want to do is guarantee real results for Canadians. And what we put forward was 4 different areas. 1 of them mandatory and 3 that they can sort of play with at different levels. The mandatory one is we are demanding a better quality of data collection across the country so we have rigorous understanding of what's working, what's not, what's being delivered for Canadians, what's not, how much it's costing, how much is being effective in all those areas, so we can both compare across, but so individuals can, if you show up at a emergency room, they can see what your latest tests were or who your specialist is and what you're actually dealing with, so you can get a better quality of care. That's a really important thing. So data is the big thing that's actually going to allow for a level of accountability, not to the federal government, but to Canadians. If people can suddenly see, wow, in the province next door, they're doing this really well, and look at the success rate for this procedure, and look at the success rate for us here, what's going wrong? You need to fix this. That kind of pressure and improvement comes if you measure something, you can actually improve it. If you're not measuring it, you don't know what to improve. So data is a big piece of it. The other 3 that we are demanding improvements in as well, access to family doctors, it's fundamental. If everyone has a family doctor, the system gets a hell of a lot better for everyone because that's their portal in. That's someone you can connect to. That's not, you have to show up at the emergency room and overload it. They can refer you to the right specialists. Family doctors are key. We need to raise those percentages. Timely access to appropriate mental health care. Mental health is health. Making sure that people are getting the support they need quickly and appropriately is huge for individuals, for public safety, as unfortunately we're seeing increasingly these days, also for our economy. Absenteeism because of mental health in jobs is a serious challenge to the well-being of our economy, our economic functioning as well. So these are things that are mattering. And the 3rd area is support for our frontline medical workers, making sure we're training up the next wave of folks because our healthcare professionals are getting stretched, burned out. More people are leaving and leaving the ones behind stretched further and further thin. We need to make sure we're accelerating the process of recognizing credentials from international trained doctors and nurses. We need to make sure we're licensing across the country so people can go where the jobs are. There's a lot to do on that. These are all things that we're doing, but it's overlaid with a level of openness, accountability, and expectation on the public system that we're going to keep moving on. So thank you for that. Jacqueline, question?
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. My name's Andrew, and I'm a 2nd-year motive power student. And my question for you is the CBC reported in November of last year that there's still an upwards of $1 billion in outstanding CERB debt. What is the Liberal government's plan to ensure these debts are paid by the individuals and not by the collective taxpayer?
Oh, that's a great question, Andrew, because it does go to a sense of fairness. There's a lot of people who would have perhaps liked to get the CERB, but realized they didn't qualify for it and didn't apply for it. So we do need to make sure that it's fair. But let's also take a step back and remember what the CERB was about. When the pandemic hit, a whole bunch of people lost their jobs. And we needed them to continue to be able to pay the groceries, continue to be able to pay their rent, continue to be able to support their families even though they weren't working. We know the number of people who are living paycheck to paycheck in this country is extremely high. And if we didn't give people an opportunity to support their families through the pandemic, they were going to figure out ways to go out and work under the table or in the black market, put themselves at risk, put their families at risk, and quite frankly, put the health of the country at risk before we had vaccines, before we had the ability to handle this virus. So we moved extremely quickly on the CERB. Most people, from the time we basically shut down the economy in March of 2020. A couple weeks later, people got their last paycheck. A couple weeks after that, the CERB checks started arriving. We were able to spin it around on a dime. And whenever you were going to do that, you have to make choices. If we had asked people to send in all the documentation to justify that they really needed this money, that they had no other source of income, that they weren't going to be able to make it through, that they had a regular source of income the years before, and they made a minimum amount of money, and they now need this as a replacement income, it would have bogged down the system. We would have had people analyzing those files and sending out that money. It would have gotten there 6 months later. We chose speed over accuracy in the beginning because we knew quite rightly in this situation, we knew some people would get it in error or wrongfully, but we didn't want anyone who needed it to go without. So that's the choice we made. But what that leads to is, after the fact, we are going to have to try and make sure, because the system is fair, that if you got the CERB erroneously, or if you were double collecting, or if you were trying to defraud the system, we had to go and make sure there are consequences. So there are people, there are organized crime that had campaigns to defraud the system, and those people are being chased after and prosecuted, and there will be consequences. There are others who were just so panicked about the whole thing, they were like, okay, they're getting money, $500 a week, I'm going to sign up for that, even though they didn't qualify, okay, whatever. And what we're doing is we're working with people right now. We're working with people to try and make sure that we can get that money back in a way that is responsible, so that's fair for people who would have loved it but didn't necessarily apply for it. But think again about the people that we're talking about. If you were even able to qualify erroneously for the CERB, you're not someone making $100,000 a year, $200,000 a year. These are people who are already on vulnerable paycheck to paycheck levels, and flowing that money to them was the right thing to do, even if we have to work on payment schedules to get that money back now in responsible ways. But the overall position we took of both a CERB to support individuals and a wage subsidy so that businesses could keep people on the payroll was a huge part of why we had a better pandemic, if you can use that word for a pandemic that cost us tens of thousands of Canadian lives, a less bad pandemic than just about any of our peer countries. Because people were, first of all, confident that our institutions were there to take care of them. We actually were able to deliver those supports. People were like, oh, okay, I'm not left to fend for myself in this world. The structures around our community, our institutions are there to support me. That's reassuring. So then when doctors came out and said, do this, wear a mask, be careful, they said, okay, we can do this. We got it under control. And when we leaned in on supporting seniors who were so vulnerable, that worked as well, although it was too tragic. And then when the vaccines show up, Canadians got vaccinated to a higher degree than just about anyone else in the world, certainly any of our comparable Western countries. Why? Because people trusted in the system and the institutions and in the framework of the country that was taking care of us. Maintaining that confidence and that sense of community when people's instinct is, oh my God, it's a global calamity, everyone look out for themselves, which would have led to much worse outcomes, and indeed did lead to much worse outcomes in places where that was the mindset, was a huge part of it. So yes, We are making sure that there are repayments. But the fact that we made those investments has led to stronger economic growth and a faster recovery in our economy than in many other places. We got back to full employment 6 months before even the United States did out of the pandemic, which demonstrated that, yes, investing massively in supporting people in a very solid way was not just the nice thing to do, it was actually the smart economically thing to do. And that's why we are doing well right now. And the reality of that we're facing higher inflation now is part of the strength of that recovery that we had. But if economists had been told, if decisions makers had been told in 2020, facing down this global external recession that landed on us, that the biggest challenge we were going to face coming out of it was inflation because the economy would be hotter than the supply chains could handle, that would have been a best case scenario for a lot of people. That was this, and inflation is challenging. There's no question about it. Food prices are high, which is why we're bringing in the grocery rebate as part of our budget. That's going to help a lot of families, get through this next stretch. But the choice we made to support people has left our economy and our recovery stronger and demonstrated that by being there to support people, by making sure everyone has a chance to succeed and to be safe, we do better, is something that we need to apply even outside of pandemic times. But thank you for your question, Andrew. All right, we have time for maybe one. Actually, I will take 3 questions, one after the other, and I will answer them all together. We'll go with you, we'll go with you, and we'll go with you. There we go.
Hi, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Haspreet Singh, and I'm a sports management student for Durham College. I also work as a public address speaker announcer for the college varsity teams. As much as I would like to ask you about sports in the industry over here in Canada, as you told that you are notorious to answer in detail, so I would like to ask you the notorious question and ask the side of yours, and let you go back to your time in McGill University and University of British Columbia when you were there as a student. The questions I would like to ask you is, how will you spend time, the quiet time in anticipation of tough decisions, though it was in your university times and now you being in politics at the highest levels? And also a question is, how do you decide whom to trust and how does someone earn your trust?
Great question, Fasreet. Okay, you.
Hi, my name is Justin, and I'm an environmental technology student. My question to you is very simple. Will Canada be hit by a recession in the coming years? And what plans government has to work on that?
Great question, Justin. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. My name is Merlinda Assimi. I'm a welding student here at Durham. And my question is, how does your government plan to keep jobs in Canada? And how do you plan to spur more jobs? Because I know we are in a labor shortage. But how will you make sure these jobs pay a living wage and a wage that allows us to afford the $2,600 rent costs that we're facing, especially now in the GTA and even in Whitby?
Excellent. 3 great questions to end on. First of all, how do I make tough decisions for street? I've gathered around me in my life now, but even back then as I was working through it. But now I have the luxury of gathering around me some of the smartest people I've ever met, who regularly disagree with each other and disagree with me. And being able to watch and argue pros and cons and keep open-minded about what the best path forward is unbelievably effective. We all get wrapped up in, either an identity or a way of thinking that actually ends up sort of trapping us. And that's one of the reasons why in politics these days, so many people are talking through more and more ways of communicating your messages. Fewer and fewer people are actually listening to each other. Because it's almost like an identity threat. If you are wrong about something, then, oh my God, what else are you wrong about? And it diminishes you. Like perhaps because I grew up arguing with my father over the kitchen table, he taught me that actually when you believe something deeply and someone disagrees with you and thinks you're wrong on that, that's an amazing opportunity to dig into why and to dig into how. And sometimes you find out when you dig in that you just have two very different conceptions of the world, and there is no realigning that. It's just like, wow, you're very different from me. That's an interesting thing. I now know that there are people out there who think totally different from me, and we're not going to be able to reconcile it logically, but that's really useful. But often you find that, no, at the base level we agree in what matters, but there's a fork in there where you went one way and I go another way. Maybe you're right, maybe I'm right. Let's figure it out. And being confident enough to be open to different perspectives, because it is about confidence. It's about knowing, okay, I might be proven wrong on this, but if I'm wrong, that's useful, because I don't want to be wrong. If you can demonstrate that my thinking is wrong, then absolutely, that'll make me a better person because I won't be on that wrong path. But having that openness and that confidence to say, okay, this is something I really, really believe, but maybe even as much as I disagree with you, you have a point about this or that. And at the least, it'll help me build up arguments next time I meet you to be able to take apart that point. Or maybe I'm going to have to incorporate that point into my thinking. But having the confidence to be open to different perspectives on the world is really important. And on trust, I don't know. I think I was 7 the first time some kid came up to me in the schoolyard and said, my parents didn't vote for your dad, so you suck. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Okay, you don't approve of my dad's job? Okay, fine, it's elections, that's what it's like. But why do I suck? What is that to do with me? And I had to learn that people have perspectives and perceptions of me that are, mean and nasty and totally ungrounded in anything I heard. I'd go on later and I'd steal someone's girlfriend, and yeah, they had the right to dislike me. Didn't actually do that. I was always very respectful. But there are people who would have reasons not to like me, sure. But grounded in, well, I don't like what your dad did, or I disagree with that policy or whatever, okay, that's not about me. You don't get to define me for that. And being able to detach from that was a really important part of developing my own self-confidence. And the harder thing was there were people who loved my dad who therefore automatically loved me and thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But they were potentially just as wrong as the people who didn't like me for reasons related to my father. So I had to develop a really strong sense of self. And having a strong sense of yourself allows you to get the measure of someone else reasonably quickly, and you learn, okay, I'm going to trust you, and turns out I wasn't right to trust you. And through life, you get a better sense, and I am now incredibly lucky to be surrounded by great friends that I can absolutely trust, and that's something that is a real richness in this world for any one of us. Thank you for those questions. Shoshan, recession. We are seeing a global slowdown right now. We're seeing the costs on all of us of the war in Ukraine that we need to continue to stand strong against. We're seeing what happened when, for a decade, we built out just-in-time supply chains that were focused on maximum efficiency that haven't been able to adjust to the new reality of a world which is really uncertain. So there is choppy waters ahead for the world. What it'll do to Canada is still uncertain. Recessions are characterized and are most impacted by massive job losses. That's when people lose their jobs, is when they lose their homes. It's where you really get the most difficult times through recessions. we have such a high employment level right now and labor shortages that people are wondering whether, if there is a global economic slowdown, even if there is a recession, are we going to have the same kind of recession or even a recession in Canada? We're not sure right now. But what we are sure of is, despite the short-term challenges we're facing as a country, we're incredibly well positioned for the challenges of the coming years as we get through this. Energy challenges, we have one of the cleanest electricity grids in the world. We're investing massively in renewable energies. Germany just came over last summer, and the Chancellor was asking us and investing in offshore wind generation so we can convert it to hydrogen to send over to Germany because they need it, because they need to get off Russian oil and gas and accelerate their process off oil and gas altogether. Much of the world, like Canada, has committed to 2035. Every new car sold in Canada will be an electric vehicle. The amount of lithium the world is going to need for that is massive. And right now, lithium is almost entirely only available from China. And what people have seen with what Russia has tried to do to Europe with oil and gas, as they've forced Europe to switch off of Russian oil and gas, Europe had gotten dependent to a large extent on Russian oil and gas, and that's why these past couple of years has been so much harder on Europe, and the inflation levels have been so much higher there than on Canada, because we continue to have our own energy sources. But the lesson that people are drawing from it is relying too much on a supplier that doesn't share our values, that has demonstrated a willingness to use economic and trade policy as a weapon for destabilizing or political influence, as Russia is, as China sometimes has, is a recipe for disaster, or for at least challenges. And we're going to need massive amounts of lithium. If we're fully dependent on China for that, our green future is not in our own control, in our own hands. Fortunately, Canada has significant lithium resources. And Canada has the ability to develop those resources responsibly, with high-quality labor standards, with respect for human rights, with partnership with Indigenous peoples, and to be a reliable supplier to countries like the United States and Europe that share our values. They know we're never going to use it as a lever to bring, a European country to its knees because we don't like the leadership. That's not what Canada does. So around the world, people are looking at Canada. That's just one example. Canada as a source of reliable critical minerals, reliable energy, reliable innovation and manufacturing, because of our growing population, because of our incredible workforce. Canada is so well positioned for the coming years. If there is a global economic slowdown and challenges facing Canadians, we have the fiscal frame and ability to respond to that. We have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the best debt to GDP ratio. The size of our debt in proportion to the size of our economy is the lowest in the G7. We have a AAA credit rating from the bond rating agencies that says Canada's fiscal track is sustainable, which means if things do take a bad turn in Canada, we're going to be able to be there to support Canadians. Even just in this budget, recognizing that these are difficult times, we've stepped up with targeted supports, the grocery rebate, child care, dental care, in ways that are making a real difference in people's lives, but in a targeted way that isn't going to increase inflation at a time where we're trying to bring it down. So, yes, we're watching like everyone is. Is the global economy going to slow down and end up in a recession? If it does, we will be able to help Canadians through it. And no matter what happens, as we come out the other side, as we will, Canada is positioned incredibly well for the transformed economy of the world of the years to come. Thank you for your question. And finally, Melinda, you struck on perhaps the most important question of the night. Over the past number of years, even decades, there's been a saying, very popular amongst the wealthy, that the rising tide lifts all boats. That if we create growth in the economy, everyone will benefit. So countries around the world put forward pro-growth policies like free trade and globalization, like efficient supply chains, massive investments in research and innovation and creation of patents and new technologies. And absolutely that led to growth. But that growth and that benefit did not trickle down to everyone else. The middle class in Western economies started to get hollowed out. That middle class that during the post-war boom years of the 50s and 60s, was able to, build a good home for themselves, a good future for their families, send their kids to good schools. We were suddenly getting to a place where people were wondering if that idea of progress no longer held. That perhaps this next generation wouldn't automatically do better than the current generation. And if the idea of progress no longer holds, the idea of the American or the Canadian dream no longer being a reality, that's a problem in terms of social stability, social cohesion, about people's commitment to our country and our institutions. Because the deal is, we're part of a country, we obey its laws because we feel it's going to look out for us and give us opportunities to succeed. And unfortunately, the 2008 recession hit, and the banks got bailouts in the United States, but a whole bunch of middle-class folks lost their homes. And then after the recession, profits went up, but wages didn't. And people started to worry increasingly about whether they were going to be able to support their families all the way to retirement, with offshoring, with the uncertainties around it. People were anxious. People were worried. People were wondering, is there a future for them? And everything changing around, climate change saying, your oil and gas jobs are going to disappear. Automation meaning, AI's coming, you're going to lose your jobs as clerical workers. More offshoring, call centers are disappearing, all sorts of good jobs are disappearing. The billionaires are getting richer and richer and nobody else is helping. Well, there's two things you can do as a politician, as a leader faced with that challenge. You can say, wow, people are mad as hell. Let me instrumentalize that. Let me show them that I hear how angry they are. Let me reflect that anger back at them. And we'll get them to grab pitchforks and vote for me because I'm really angry like you guys are. And that's actually the easy way to do it. And we've seen it work in places all around the world where people know people are anxious and angry. All you can do is say, yeah, you should be angry. Great. It's effective to get yourself elected, as we've seen. It's just not so effective in actually solving those problems that made people angry. As Jason Kenney discovered, for example, when he stoked a lot of anger in Alberta, and then that anger turned against him when he couldn't sustain it. But there's another option. And it's the option we put forward in 2015. of saying, let's build a strong economy that's focused on the middle class and people working hard to join it. Let's understand that even though if you talk to any wealthy business person, they'll say, look, give me more tax credits and I'll be able to hire more people. Lower my personal taxes and I'll be creating wealth for the economy. And we said, no. First thing we did, we raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. Then we delivered a Canada Child benefit that was means tested, which meant wealthy families didn't get any. And we lifted 500,000 kids out of poverty over the past years with that. We delivered things like childcare, cutting childcare fees in half in Ontario, just as the inflation and interest rates were going up, meant that people who had a variable rate mortgage and kids in childcare suddenly saw their childcare fees drop in half, enough to be able to cover their mortgage during this difficult time. And more than that, we realized, despite the protestations of the bankers and the business people on Bay Street, that if we put more stability, more money in the pockets of the middle class, more opportunities to grow their jobs and their careers in a stable way, the richest would be just fine. They'd figure out how to make money off of more disposable income that the middle class and those working hard to join it would have. That's part of what we've seen over these past 8 years. That building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up is the way to create not just a stronger economy, but a better, more stable society. When women can join the workforce in record numbers, when every kid has the opportunity to start grade 1 in the best possible way because of childcare and get the best possible education and therefore the best possible career. When we're dismantling the barriers that exist for Indigenous kids, dismantling the anti-black racism that continues to be within our systems around access to capital, around our justice systems, dismantling all the different barriers that keep people from being able to succeed in their full potential, our economy does better. But your question was very specific, Melinda. What are we doing about those jobs now? How are we making sure that there are good middle-class jobs for years to come in the global uncertainty, in the disrupted supply chains? We're doubling down on the fight against climate change. If Volkswagen decided to come to Canada, it wasn't just because we have natural resources that they can use in building their batteries. It's because Canadian workers with health care, with stable communities, safer than the United States, with generally more thoughtful political disagreements than you have south of the border, less toxic polarization, although it's creeping in and we have to be careful, makes Canada a much more attractive place to invest in stable companies that are going to last for a long time. The fact that 8 years ago we stepped up in a big way and put a price on pollution, as I talked about with Agnes, was an indication that we know where the world is going and we want to be part of it. Whereas the United States, they're having to do a really big IRA right now, big investment in green, because they lost 4 years under the previous administration in investing in the green transformation of our economy. We are building a sense of Canada knows where the future is going and are better positioned to get there than just about any other country in the world. When you look at the populations of the G7 countries, more or less flatline, Canada's the outlier because we're still so open to immigration. We have programs like the Global Skills Strategy that brings in top engineers from anywhere around the world in a few weeks to be able to build those research facilities or jobs that we really need. But there's always more to do. So one of the things we put in this budget, Melinda, is we're putting historic tax credits down on things like building the clean electricity grid, making sure that by 2035 we have 100% carbon neutral electricity grid, because companies around the world want to be building things with clean electricity. But that's going to take investments in more renewables, investments in nuclear, investments in geothermal and tidal and all these sorts of things. We're making great investments in that. We're putting tax credits on hydrogen so we can develop those solutions. We're putting tax credits on carbon capture, use, and storage so that we can use the natural gas, convert it into pure hydrogen, and make sure that we're not emitting carbon and continuing to contribute to greenhouse, to global warming and climate change. But a piece of all of those tax credits, if a company wants to get those tax credits to the max for those investments they're making, for the first time ever, we put in labor requirements. They have to pay people good living wages at union levels in all those industries if they want to build the future. And it's not just self-serving to make sure that people are paid well. It's because increasingly clients and customers around the world of those big companies are wanting to know that things are being done responsibly, that you're supporting real communities where people can have that future, know their kids are in good hands, know there will be jobs for them into the future, where you're responsible about the environment, where you're working with indigenous communities in respect and breaking down the colonial practices of decades and generations past. People care about provenance now. One of the challenges that I've always been frustrated by as Western democracies parade around the world saying our model is the best, you should all be democracies, you should all be capitalist, successful democracies like us, is that our model hinged for too long, for too many years, on relying on natural resources and energies from dictatorships and autocracies around the world that didn't care about the environment, that didn't care about human rights, that didn't care about labor standards. And we can't pretend that our model is the best if it relies on the exploitation of people on the other side of the world. And that's the reckoning we're going through right now as a world. That's what we're realizing with the war in Ukraine, with the behavior of authoritarian states, with the need to see real, positive growth and opportunity in places like Africa or South America. We need to change the way things are done, and there is no country in the world better positioned to lead that change and benefit from that change than Canada. So that's how we make sure there's a strong future for the middle class in this country. That's how we make sure more people get to join the middle class. That's how we create the prosperity and the growth that Canada's going to need in the coming years. Thank you very much, my friends. Yes.